So the title of my presentation is "Does the Pragmatist Reflection on Ethical and Aesthetic Values Meet the Kantian Axiology for its, I mean Pragmatist, future development?" So I will explain during the most time of my speech what I mean, what the particular parts of this title mean. So at the very beginning, I would like to, as it's pronounced, my at least partial affiliation to American Pragmatist. And the first reason maybe is that I'm hoping to talk about the problems of man and not only problems of philosophers or professors of philosophy. So I don't want to abandon the traditional way of addressing philosophers or professors of philosophy, and I would like to also talk possibly to other audiences, or at least think that I'm talking to other audiences as well. And I think American Pragmatism has given us a chance to do that. And perhaps other philosophical movements do not recognize this need. But anyway, it is one of the main reasons why I would like to affiliate myself with this movement. So the first element of my talk is values. Why values? And I want to explain. Well, as you know, contemporary axiology was born more or less in the late 19th century in Germany with Locke, with Baden neo-Kantian philosophy. At the same time, a little bit later, American Pragmatism was born. And I think there was some kind of interesting interconnection. But about this, I will talk a bit later. Anyway, values and axiology was, I think, at some time of its development, a promising discipline that had some kind of hope that by means of investigating what value is or what values are of different sorts, they would, I mean, these investigations about values would explain better different problems within science or culture or ethics and aesthetics. So I'm coming partially from the tradition that recognized the importance of values, or at least reflection on values. So it is one part of the story for the professors. For the other audiences, values is a crucial term nowadays, even nowadays, in public talks about different things. If you listen to presidents nowadays of different countries, to religious leaders of different religions, of cultural people talking about cultures. For example, what's the difference between American culture, European culture? Very often they would refer to the term value or values, and they will talk about American values without explaining what's this. They will refer to European values without much explaining what's this, and so on and so on. So I think very often you can hear that value is a kind of key term by means of which many people justify very important things, not telling too much what they mean by values, as if to assume that everybody who is listening will know what's this. And I think the axiological reflection, or just reflection on values, is very important because it can become a kind of key term by means of which you can take a bit deeper look into what people, or important people, talking to ordinary people mean by saying that we justify something because we defend our values. What's this? So that's why I think it is not only philosophically important, but also culturally instructive. That's why I've been interested in the problems of values. The other thing why I am connecting in my title and in my paper ethical values and aesthetic values, at least for two reasons. The first reason is that, as you know, in the pre-axiological time, in ancient Greece, in the Renaissance, so before the time that professional axiology was born, the reflection about values had different forms. One of them was, I would say, extensive reflection if there is any solid division between ethical values and aesthetic values. The Greeks call it kalokagatia, and there were different forms of this. I don't want to get back to this. However, I think, and it's my personal opinion, not only my personal opinion, but I'm thinking very intensively about that. If we do not have an occasion at different places and different times to realize if nowadays we do not have a chance to get back in a different sense, to this idea. And what I am proposing is to think about ethical messages by means of aesthetically equipped modes of transmission of communication or information. I am not saying that aesthetic values and ethical values are the same. I'm not saying that. I want to say that perhaps it would be nice to think if ethical messages or messages about ethical values should not, for some reasons, and I will explain what this reason might be, should not for some reasons as if take an aesthetic form. For example, when you have a message on ethical values put or transmitted in a clear, attractive, and inspirational way. In this sense, I do not think, I repeat, that these areas, aesthetic, or aesthetics, or aesthetic values, and ethical values are the same. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that these two need each other for some reasons. What are the reasons later on? So that's why my reflection about this union, in inverted commas, possible being together or close together, aesthetic values, some aesthetic values and some ethical values. Third, why American pragmatism? Well, not only because American pragmatism, as I mentioned before, is or should be focused upon the problem of man, not just problems of some particular group, but also because it refers to action. Refers to action, not just talking about action, but to action itself. So it's attractive for me. The second thing is that American pragmatism, in the version, for example, of William James, John Locke, recently, refer to the idea of potential. And human anthropologically understood potential, human potential, and the idea of fulfillment of this potential, which is something very interesting for me. And the third one, Rawlsian understanding of what we were talking about before during this conference, about the idea of we, meaning that I think is very important, that we say our cognition of values, or our values, or we defend our values. Rawlsian version of pragmatism would be sensitive to saying or asking, what you mean by we? What you mean by our? So it is a bit particular and explaining a lot to me. That's why I love Rawlsian explaining we liberals in the West, we people living in big cities and so on. And so I think this is very important. For these reasons, I sympathize with this American pragmatism as a philosophical movement. Why I say in the title reflection or pragmatist reflection rather than theory? Well, because first, I refuse to think that important thinking about value should be just producing another theory of value. I refuse to think so. I think it's important. I think it's important. But I think also it's important to actively promote some action about values. And I think American philosophers, some of them trying to do that. And also, I think in American pragmatism, there is no definite idea that that amelioration of world means producing another theory of values, something like that. Rather, it is a certain kind of activity and getting into social issues and doing something. So John Dewey would be a perfect example. I think William James as well, and many, many others. So I think this is important. Once again, I repeat, I do not want to marginalize theory of values or kind of need to produce more complete theory of values, especially that American pragmatism, I think, does not have a unique or, I don't know, strong theory of values. There are many American pragmatists who are referring to values, a theory of values in different, I would say, level of intensity. So when we read different texts, the word value or worthy or normativity if connected to value is very pronounced, but in different way of intensification. So for some, like because Russia, it's very important. For others, like Rorty, it is not. But all of them, I think, refer to some extent to the what we can call world of values or the importance of values, and they refer directly or indirectly to this. So for me, it is much easier to talk about pragmatist reflection of values rather than specifically about pragmatist theory or pragmatist theorists of values. Why Kantian? Well, as you know, Baden neo-Kantianism produced very strong axiology or philosophy of values at that time. I mean, at the same time where American pragmatism, while a little bit earlier, was born. And I think American or classic American pragmatists, well, took something or took a lot. I don't know. It is difficult because it depends upon the author, but took something important, some intuition from German axiology, especially because almost everybody at the time went to Germany to study, and they knew Lotze, they knew Windelband, and some Germans came to the US at that time. And for me, a good example, maybe a key example of this intellectual interchange of ideas as far as philosophy of values is concerned is Hugo Münsterberg, who was at Harvard. And he, when was at Harvard for many, many years, started to write as if the second edition of his perhaps most important work in English, The Eternal Values. So he wrote in English the fundamental work of his, The Eternal Values, and we can discuss, I don't want to debate now, but we can discuss, perhaps it was one of the most representative books for, let's say, neo-Kantian version of axiology. By the way, Münsterberg dedicated this book to Josiah Rice. For many of us, Josiah Rice was founder of pragmatism. But so there is an interesting, for me, portion of intellectual interchange, because at that time, Münsterberg criticized pragmatism. He knew from Harvard, and he advocated the tradition of neo-Kantian understanding of axiology or philosophy of values. So for me, it was very instructive to study the book from the point of view of as if contrasting views upon values from the perspective of neo-Kantian and at the same pragmatism. So when I say that this meeting point between classical representatives of American pragmatism and some representatives of German philosophy at the time where axiology was thriving at German universities, I think it may be an important factor to not just to compare, because comparison is one thing, but to think if, and this is one of the main points, American tradition, tradition of American pragmatism can be stimulated in this way or another from post-Kantian thought, later developed in, of course, phenomenology of Max Schiller, Nikolai Hartmann, and so on and so on. But so this is a kind of idea. I don't want to compare these two. I don't want to be misunderstood. I don't want to compare these two. I want to think if American pragmatists or pragmatists who want to think about the world of values nowadays in face of new challenges, and what are these challenges, I will say in a second, might be inspired by some perhaps interesting stimulations from axiology of Kantian tradition. And now let me say what I mean by challenges. Well, I refuse to think that nothing has changed since time of Kant. I refuse to think that nothing has changed since the time when pragmatism was born. A lot of things have changed. We have new challenges and we have new things. One that is most interesting for me at this place and at this time is something that we can call pictorial revolution. I mean, the omnipresent images in media and streets, like billboards, commercial presentations, the internet, Facebook, and so on. Not because, and let me repeat this, not because we, professional professors of philosophy, are dealing with this, but because the people with whom we are talking, for example, our students, they have these images most probably already in their heads. And they think, most probably, or most of them, or many of them, by means of these images more than we think. And when we talk to them by means of textual narratives, and we ask them to read books, and we ask them to think by means of argumentation, I seem to think that many of them think more or are stimulated much more by the images they take from the website or YouTube. And it is not as if something wrong. I think this is a challenge for contemporary philosophers who have been as if learned to operate by means of textual culture, where reading and oral culture, where talking is important. But this is a change, an important civilizational change. One of many. I don't want to reduce it to just, this is the most important. It is one of many changes that I think we should accommodate to in some way. So what I'm proposing, I propose to think that perhaps our language, or our way of talking, our way of argumenting, perhaps could be richer. I'm not saying, please do not understand this way, that it's going to be more conclusive. I'm not saying that it's going to be more conclusive. I'm saying it may be richer, maybe more pregnant with meaning when we amplify our language by means of different other type of languages like pictorial language, cinematic language, and so on. So in traditional aesthetics, such values, some of them I mentioned already, inspiration, clearness, attractiveness, referring to imagination, I think they may be seen as those aesthetic components, or components that I would call aesthetic values that can be, on some occasions, as if attached or be interconnected with the messages we are sending to our audience. So let me give just two examples. When we discuss by means of our language about, say, abortion, is it not the case that much stronger to different audiences, much stronger message is sent by those who assist their ethical message by means of images that you know from mass media, TV, and so on. The same, those guys who talk about anti-abortion issues. Is it not the case that for many audiences, and I say, or I insist to say in plural, not audience, but audiences, that for some audiences, these images, pro or anti, do not mean much more than our just talking by means of our argumentation about these issues? My answer to this question is yes. Most probably, these audiences have been touched or have been influenced already by some images they had seen already. And they react to our messages very often by associating, this way or another, our message to the images they have already in the head. The other example is discussion about immigrants. Is it not the case that powerful, sometimes very brutal images we see on TV as millions and millions of people of different target audiences? We see the images. It is not the case that these images, to some audiences, are much stronger as far as moral message is concerned, much stronger than even most powerful intellectual argumentation? My answer to this question is yes. In some, I insist, I repeat, and I emphasize, in some audiences, yes, it is the case. So I can multiply these examples, and I'm pretty sure you can help me with these examples, but I want to continue. What I want to do now is to say that even in philosophy 100 years ago, and I'm pretty sure it's even, I can find older examples, I saw suggestions that this linking of ethical messages with aesthetic attraction makes some sense. And the only quote I'm proposing to you tonight is Windelband's Introduction to Philosophy. Windelband, one of the main figures of neo-Kantian philosophy, says, it is not so much the difficulty of philosophy as the poor literary standard of philosophical writers which perplexes the student. So this is his diagnosis, what his proposal. The proposal is the finer quality of the artistic expressions of the ideas and works. In other words, he was trying to say that if philosophers are going to give their messages in a more artistically finer way, most probably the messages about ethical values are going to be more readable, accessible to the students. And I think this, and I can multiply quotation of the sort, but this is exactly what I mean. I am not saying, I repeat that, I am not saying that if we apply or if we use contemporary modes of communication, we will be more conclusive in our philosophical debates. I am not saying this. Maybe yes, maybe no. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that The world is being changed. New modes of communications are easy at hand. Philosophers who are not using these modes of communications, I think, commit a mistake by making their messages less readable or less maybe learnable to many audiences that are at hand. And what I think is pragmatist philosophers as if obligation to reach those audiences. So this is my message and the main thesis. So just two examples amongst many that are visible on our website where we have our text, the website of Very Practical Philosophy International Forums. Just two examples to illustrate my case. What philosophers from pragmatist American tradition can learn or can think by being stimulated by German philosophers from the Kantian tradition is the via negativa way, not to copy the Kantians in referring to nobody in the message, not to say that we should or men should or whatever. I think this via negativa way is very important for philosophers, the stimulation that we are talking about our will. A pragmatist thinker, or maybe the guy who would like to describe himself or herself as social pragmatist, one who is interested in social amelioration. Such a person should ask a question. What do you mean by our will? Who's this guy we are talking about? So it is kind of the negative way. And the other example very important to me is inspirational factor. Hilary Putnam, who was reading Kant, the third critique, the paragraph 49, I think, he was detecting this example that in Kant, in the third critique, there was a very important thing that we should refer to that. And as a result, we produce or generate something that it is called, I think it is indefinite discussion, producing discussion. So this aesthetic factor or aesthetic value would be when you have a moral message or about message about moral values, or maybe it would be good to be inspirational for different audiences. And this is your task to do. So when you are not inspirational and you are telling your story just to tell somebody about the truth, perhaps for a guy from a pragmatist or social pragmatist tradition, perhaps it is not too much. Perhaps it would be better to do something to equip your message by doing something to make this message or to convert this message into something inspirational for various audiences. So it would be as if importing or taking aesthetic element of aesthetic traditionalist and aesthetic values and employing it into what we call traditionally ethical values, right? So this is what I mean. And thank you for your attention.